Yeah, I must say, I find the timing of your visit to Finland and Estonia interesting, Taoiseach, because this weekend we have the biggest NATO military exercise that has taken place in decades, and it was planned before the war in Ukraine, taking place in Estonia, involving Finland and Sweden, countries that are now planning to abandon their neutrality. Now, that's a decision for them, but it is interesting, is it not, that in advance of the war in Ukraine, NATO were planning massive military exercises, which they're now carrying out all over Eastern Europe. Now, we all must rightly continue to condemn the unjustifiable, brutal, murderous military aggression of Putin. But as a neutral country, do we have nothing to say about this growing move towards essentially dividing Europe into two armed military camps, sidling up against one another in a pretty alarming way? Have you any thought that maybe our new position as a neutral state should warn against this military escalation?
Again, Deputy Boyd Barrett chose these words carefully, so when he suggested that the timing was interesting, the clear implication being that I was going there because of NATO or the application for Finland, which is not the case at all. I think both countries do offer very significant insights. They're both members of the European Union, by the way, so I hope that there's no problem with visiting fellow members of the European Union. But just for deputies generally, the view of, and they're not the Swedish establishment or the Finnish establishment, it's the elected government of those countries. No, but that language establishment sort of conveys as if there's some sort of elite up there who has no connection with anybody. They're elected, and it's the elected government I met. And I just want to say to Richard that they said to me, and no one more than Finland has navigated an extraordinary relationship with Russia over such a long period of time, peacefully, coexistence. But as the Prime Minister said to me, everything they were taught during their school days about the potential fear, the potential threat, what could happen, came to realisation in the invasion of Ukraine. And given that they're physically on the border, there's a very fundamental question begs to be answered. Who will come to protect us if Russia invades? No one's obliged to right now. There's a mutual assistance clause in the European Union which is not as well defined as the NATO provisions are for a country like Finland. Ukraine is not in NATO. Ukraine is defending itself. It's getting supports, getting weaponry, but essentially it's young Ukrainian men who are at the front line. And I don't think, deputies, you can ever take from the fact the reason Finland and Sweden are applying now is simply because of the immoral and unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine by Russia. There's no other rationale for it. And that has been the clear catalyst. I wouldn't call it a shock doctrine either, that people are just delighted that it's so we can now join. I don't think that's it. And I think the public opinion has changed. Public opinion has changed dramatically. And as Deputy McAuliffe said there, the vote in itself in the Parliament is indicative of the degree to which public opinion has shifted in both countries because of what has happened. I mean, what's happening is barbaric. By any standard, what is happening is barbaric. And entire towns and cities have been levelled in Ukraine. And if you're near the border or on the border, you'd have a much different perspective, I'm afraid. That's just the reality of life and human nature. I don't buy the argument that sort of the NATO planning major exercises are somehow comparable to what's happening in Ukraine. They are not. NATO has attacked nobody. NATO has not attacked anybody. NATO didn't bomb any town, didn't bomb any city. But this kind of whataboutery, this sort of attempts by Deputy Murphy and Deputy Boyd Barrett to sort of draw, to have equivalence between NATO and Russia, and Russian behaviour is unacceptable. It's wrong, in my view. It's wrong. It's just plain wrong. Because NATO did everything they possibly could, and NATO states like France, Germany, did everything they could to prevent war prior to war breaking out.